and economist. Joining me right now is Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass of California and Phil Rucker, his White House bureau chief at the Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst. First, the news, Phil. Thank you for joining us tonight. You guys know what's going on. You and Ashley and the rest have been sniffing out trouble for a long time now. How many more heads are? It seems like Trump's openly calling it hunting season. He said on the driveway a couple of days ago, yeah, I'm almost where I want to get. In other words, more heads to go.
Yeah, so Chris, I was just talking to a few senior White House officials this afternoon about this, and there's a feeling that there will definitely be more departures and changes to come, in part because the president is more than a year into this job. He has a very clear sense of who he thinks is doing a good job in the cabinet and the senior staff, who's doing a bad job, who he gets along with, who he doesn't get along with. And one official said, look, think of it as a thinning out of the inner circle. He's going to try to rely on people that he has good relationships with, a good rapport, who he feels like get him and understand him. And so that's why you're seeing a move like replacing Rex Tillerson with Mike Pompeo at the State Department, someone the president has a real comfort level with.
You know, I'm just thinking back to our best presidents. I mean, the ones that succeeded politically. You can argue left, right all night, but Roosevelt had Harry Hopkins. Reagan had Jim Baker. They relied on certain people, and Mike Deaver, they relied on certain people all the time because they need a consigliere. That somebody says, well, wait a minute, you didn't think of this, Mr. President, or you don't know what this is going to lead to, or the consequence here you haven't considered. You need somebody to second guess you, not challenge you all the time, but be a bigger brain for you. Does Trump think his brain, his well-advertised IQ, is enough to answer all the big questions, make all the big decisions without help? Is that what he thinks he can do?
I think he does. He feels like he knows how to do this job now, and in those first few months he was learning. He was managed by people like Mattis and Tillerson and John Kelly, who's now the chief of staff, the sort of generals around him. And he now feels like, look, he can make these decisions on his own. And I think he's also going to look to get rid of people who are creating distractions that create bad headlines and bad political optics for him. And the first place to look would be the VA, the Veterans Affairs Department, where Secretary Shulkin, he seems to be under a lot of heat right now and may be out soon.
You know, I just think of all the presidents I admired, and Reagan I do in certain ways, but like Kennedy I really admired. He had like Ted Sorensen around. He called it his intellectual blood bank. People need people. I don't know how you operate, but I think you members of Congress, you need somebody to check some. What do you think of that idea? Is that a good idea? Am I going to cancel that meeting? Is that a smart move or not? Or who? You know, this guy doesn't think he needs advice from anybody.
Well, but the problem is that if you add to that the fact that he doesn't read, he doesn't want to have briefing memos, he doesn't want information, he comes into the job with very little knowledge, and so he has experts around him like Mattis and McMaster, and he doesn't want to listen to them. So who is he going to have at his side? Basically his friends, his donors, people that were in the construction, his kids?
It is like the Romanovs, as I've said a million times. Anyway, Tillerson and Cohn now join a growing list of top-level aides, staffers, and cabinet members who have resigned or been fired in what amounts to a mass exodus from this administration, which is only 14 months old. Look at that list. According to an analysis by a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, Trump's first-year turnover rate was 34% in 2017. That's higher than all recent presidencies and more than double the record during the Reagan administration during his first year. So it's not an ideological problem here. It's just a problem.
Right.
Are the people, when you get your head rolled by tweet, Phil, and you're in Africa, and the only thing that stops you from being fired while you're there, according to Post today, is that there's a John Kelly said, give the guy a break. Don't lop his head off when he's in foreign territory. But warn him, I'm going to do it when he gets home, so 3 hours after he's home. In other words, Trump's inclination was to fire the guy while he's overseas on assignment. Why would he want to do that?
Well, I think it's more that he just decided at that moment he had it with Tillerson. He wanted to fire him. He wanted to make the change. And once he decided to make that change, he wanted to announce it. He's someone who likes to break his own news on Twitter and had to be convinced he needed to wait for the Secretary of State to finish his mission. You know what? It looks however it looks, but he waited. He waited until Tillerson was back in the U.S. for about 3 hours and then announced it.
But
go with him on jet lag, get him while he's weak and groggy, and then stick it to him.
But you know
and
what?
He was sick.
What he
Yeah,
doesn't think
bug.
about is that we have to think about what this looks like to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So already we know what the president said about the entire continent of Africa.
Yeah.
This is his Secretary of State's first trip to the continent.
By the way, that particularly infelicitous term will be remembered for decades.
Well, exactly. And so, to me, full attention should have been given to this trip.
Yeah.
So now, what do you think the African heads of state
Well,
feel?
if I were in Kenya or Nigeria or Ethiopia expecting a grand trip by the top foreign minister of the United States, the most important country in the world, and probably the most important state visit we're having, and he gets fired on our watch.
Exactly, which says you don't you don't consider very much to us. But you know what? I have ambassadors in my office all the time who come in and say, what is going on in the United States?
And what do you say?
Well, you know what I say? I tell them basically that foreign policy is a bipartisan issue. You have to come to Congress because you can't really count on the administration. I can't tell them what the administration's position is.
Yeah, well, I don't think the Secretary of State could either. Anyway,
exactly.
Thank you, U.S. Congresswoman Karen Bass. It's great to have you over here. And Phil Rucker, you guys are doing it. You're doing it. Anyway, up